Carl Jung once said, "Individuation does not exclude the world. It includes it." In this, he highlighted that true psychological development must integrate both the internal and external aspects of our experience, which includes the maturation process requiring responsibilities and commitments. But what happens when someone resists this growth? When they seem eternally stuck in a phase of uncertainties and unfulfilled promises? Here, Jung introduces us to the concept of the pure eternus, the eternal adolescent. This term, inspired by the Roman child god, represents the archetype of the young person who refuses to grow up, who fears commitment, and lives in a constant search for the new and exciting, without ever truly grounding themselves or accepting limitations. Jung observed that this archetype was especially prevalent in modern society, with its endless promises of instant success and everlasting happiness. When we examine the eternal adolescent, we're looking at the shadow of personal development inside of us that resists maturity to avoid suffering, loss of freedom, or facing real responsibilities. At the same time, we must recognize that, like all archetypes, the pure has both a shadow and a luminous side. On the bright side, the pure is creative, inspiring, and adventurous. It motivates us to challenge the status quo and dream of what seems impossible. But when we become prisoners of the dark side of the pure, we remain stagnant, refusing the commitment to growth and ultimately to our own individuation journey. So, the question we must ask ourselves is, why is it so difficult to grow up? And what are we truly avoiding by remaining in this eternal adolescence? It's a complex issue, but one that holds the promise of profound insights about ourselves. Jung believed that to move forward, we must first understand the forces holding us back, the illusions, fears, and desires that sustain our resistance to growth. Let's delve into the nature of the eternal adolescent and what it represents in our process of psychological development. Jung identified in the pure eternus archetype a powerful and ambiguous energy. For him, resistance to growth was more than mere immaturity. It was a conflict between the desire for absolute freedom and the need for structure, commitment, and acceptance of one's own limits. On one hand, the pure symbolizes our capacity for imagination, creativity, and lightness, but on the other, it represents a constant escape from any type of pain or obligation. It's like a bird that refuses to land, always searching for new possibilities but never committing to anything that demands roots and depth. The development of the pure eternus archetype is closely linked to Jung's concept of individuation, which represents the process of becoming who we truly are. However, for this to occur, it's necessary to confront one's own shadow, and this is often where resistance to growth manifests. The pure shadow is the fear of limitation and the refusal to accept aspects of reality that involve loss and frustration, inevitable aspects of maturity. He explained that this archetype is more present in people with a free spirit, intense idealism, or an attraction to the new and unknown. This energy is often seen in individuals who jump from one project to another or from one relationship to another, always in search of something more stimulating. They often feel that something grand awaits them, but for fear that commitment might limit their freedom, they avoid making definitive choices. This behavior is often unconscious. Those with pure energy rarely realize they're running away. To them, it may feel like they're just following their creative instincts, their desire for authenticity, but ultimately, they're also avoiding situations that force them to face the complexities of the adult world. Individuation, however, demands an integration of these characteristics, the pure along with the mature, conscious side. To overcome resistance to growth, the individual must recognize that total freedom is an illusion and that true growth only happens through genuine commitment to life's experiences, whether pleasant or challenging. By recognizing the pure eternus archetype in our own psyche, we can understand what Jung meant by integrating opposites. Without accepting our limits and life's responsibilities, we can never become whole. Instead of fleeing, the challenge is to transform the pure's desire into an ally that inspires, while also committing to the depth required for true growth. To better understand how the pure eternus archetype manifests in daily life, we can imagine a few common situations that illustrate this resistance to growth. Consider someone who constantly changes jobs, not because they found a better opportunity, but because they can't stand the idea of stagnation. Each new job initially brings excitement, a sense of purpose, and a promise that this time, their career will finally make sense. However, as challenges arise, as the role requires effort, consistency, and perseverance, this person may start to feel trapped and constrained. The urge then is to seek something new, repeating the cycle and avoiding the depth necessary for true growth. Another example is the person who shies away from deep emotional commitments. This might be someone who begins relationships with enthusiasm, experiencing a magical, intense connection at first, but as the emotional bond requires more trust, vulnerability, and dedication, they feel a strong need to escape. They may believe they're searching for the ideal partner, but in truth, they fear the emotional responsibility and commitment that come with intimacy. With each breakup, it's common for them to convince themselves that it just wasn't the right person or the timing wasn't right. But in reality, they're avoiding the challenge of handling the complexities of a partnership. You noted that the pure Eternus archetype is marked by a fear of real life, of pain, of limitations, and of death. To the pure, anything that implies an ending, be at the end of a phase, commitment to a career, or deepening a relationship, is seen as a kind of death of their freedom, a halt to their infinite possibilities. It's this aversion to symbolic death that keeps them bound to eternal youth, living in a cycle of endless searching without a clear purpose or structure that would allow them to grow. Resistance to maturity is such a universal phenomenon that it's common to hear people say they don't feel like adults, even after years of adult life. On an unconscious level, many of us keep this archetypal figure alive within, avoiding the losses and frustrations that accompany human development. If we wish to break free from this resistance, we must start to look honestly at our own repetitive cycles, the jobs left behind, the relationships broken off, the projects never completed. Only by confronting these patterns can we see that it's often not the circumstance that's failing, but our own reluctance to fully commit. For Jung, overcoming the resistance to growth and letting go of the pure Eternus archetype requires a sincere confrontation of the projections and illusions that keep an individual trapped in cycles of eternal youth. This phase of confrontation is essential to the individuation process, as it implies a symbolic death, a farewell to an idealized self-image, an acceptance of one's limits, and a willingness to engage with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. This process of dying to oneself, as Jung describes it, is a fundamental step toward building a mature and authentic identity. In the collective unconscious, the pure represents the eternal side of the psyche, the force that connects us with creativity, intuition, and the potential for dreaming and exploring. However, when this archetype dominates consciousness, the individual becomes dependent on an illusory freedom, perpetually disconnected from reality. The challenge in integrating the pure is to find a balance between this creative energy and the need for grounding and commitment, so that the spirit of freedom does not turn into a refuge to escape life. Resistance to growth is often rooted in a deep emotional wound, in a history of insecurity or abandonment. Individuals who strongly identify with the pure Eternus often have heightened sensitivity, which, if unbalanced, can lead to considerable suffering. The idealization of novelty, dreams, and freedom can serve as an unconscious defense against pain, frustration, and the fear of failure. In this way, the fear of growing up and committing becomes a protective mechanism, preserving the image of a life free from disillusionment and limitation. The process of individuation requires each of us to face these inner defenses and integrate this resistance to maturity constructively. Rather than seeing commitment as a loss of freedom, Jung suggests that commitment can be a source of genuine growth and fulfillment. The pure must find its place within the psyche as a source of inspiration and creativity, without dominating the choices of the conscious ego. By allowing ourselves to grow and accepting life's inherent limitations, we discover that true freedom doesn't come from fleeing, but from adapting, putting down roots, and finding purpose in the real circumstances of our existence. The pure archetype reminds us that dreams are essential, but for them to flourish, they need fertile ground, patience, and constant care. Integrating the pure Eternus thus challenges us to transform this insatiable quest for novelty into a stable creative force, one capable of facing the real world and finding meaning within it. Personal growth is often uncomfortable, as it requires us to confront our limitations and take on responsibilities that the eternal adolescent fears. However, by integrating the pure Eternus archetype, we accept that maturity is not a loss of freedom, but a meeting with a deeper freedom of freedom that allows us to live authentically, aligned with our truest values and purposes. Here, the individual takes ownership of their life, finding a balance between the desire for novelty and the need for building something lasting. Jung invites us to view growth as an act of courage and honesty with oneself. By choosing to grow, we choose to live more fully and authentically, embracing both pain and pleasure, success and failure as essential parts of our journey. This movement toward maturity frees us from the illusion that happiness is a constant, perfect state, allowing us to find satisfaction in daily challenges and in the achievements that come through effort and persistence. On the path of individuation, accepting our limits does not make us less free. On the contrary, it provides the foundation needed to create roots and bring meaning to our choices. Those who resist growth live under the shadow of the pure Eternus, constantly frustrated because life doesn't match the idealized vision of a life without hardships. Jung shows us that by facing reality honestly, we discover that maturity doesn't take our dreams away. On the contrary, it helps us turn these dreams into tangible projects, achievable goals, and relationships we can nurture. The true act of creation lies not in constant escape, but in the ability to build something lasting with depth and consistency. Jung's final invitation, then, is to reconcile the poor's creative spirit with the solid strength of the adult who finds purpose in real life. This integration allows us to transcend the resistance to growth, embracing individuation as a continuous, dynamic process where true freedom is built through conscious choices and a commitment to who we truly are. This is the path of maturity, discovering that life is not made only of dreams, but also of the courage to live those dreams with our feet firmly on the ground. May we, then, find within ourselves the strength to grow, embrace the complexities of adult life, and let the eternal adolescent within us become an ally in our search for a fuller, more balanced and truer existence. This is Jung's invitation, the path of individuation, that each of us takes on the journey of maturation, transforming fear into courage and illusion into fulfillment.